Yeah, we've been actually since 2010. We've been doing the show. So now, I don't quite understand this because I think all three of us are citizens.
Yes. Of the United States.
It's not concerned with immigration, Connecticut Citizen Action Group?
Well, actually, we do support a comprehensive immigration reform proposal that gives people a path to citizenship and legalizes families and relationships here. So, no, we were started, we were actually the first of the Raider-Nader organizations formed right after the lawsuit around Allegheny Airlines 43 years ago, and we were formed on the first Earth Day as Connecticut Earth Action, and the year after that we became the Connecticut Citizen Research Group, and then after that we developed a stronger advocacy arm of tax status of 501c4 called the Connecticut Citizen Action Group. So we've been around more than 40 years in terms of here in the state, trying a bunch of organizing models and working on issues from the bottle bill to education reform.
Oh
to
my goodness! Yeah, the bottle bill. That's right. We didn't used to have deposit bottles in Connecticut. That's not that far back. As a matter of fact, Earth Day is not. It's not really that deep in the past. It's what, 40, 50 years since we've been doing Earth Day?
I think it was 1970 or 71 was the first one.
Okay, so it's a little over 40 years. And of course, Ralph Nader rings true in a lot of people's hearts.
Right.
Well, thankfully in other ways than just the 2000 election, which I think he unfairly gets blamed for. But at any rate, I remember back when he did the book Unsafe at Any Speed about the Chevy Corvair amongst other cars, and in retrospect people are blaming him because he pushed back the small car development by being critical of that particular small car because it was unsafe. But yeah, so Ralph Nader and who else was involved in setting up a Connecticut Citizen Action Group?
The original co-founder was Toby Moffett, who did a great deal was a Congress member from this part of the state, but also did a great deal of work to try to keep Ralph off the ballot in different states in 2004. And we like to joke sometimes the one thing that they both can agree on is that they did a good thing in forming CCAG.
Well, that's good. And that's kind of what we do on Progressive Soup. We sometimes have people on that don't necessarily agree with us politically. We have a lot of libertarians on talking about various issues and other folks. And we look for common ground, and then we try to put that into action. Rather than, it's not like Jack Kilpatrick and Shana Alexander from 60 Minutes back. You don't remember that, but back.
I remember 60 Minutes.
We remember 60 Minutes, but not Jack Kilpatrick and Shana Alexander, because they started off. They were like the original duo and Saturday Night Live used to make fun of them.
Oh, okay.
Jack, you bastard. Shana, you bitch. Can I say that on television? I guess I just did. But at any rate, they went back and forth, and now it seems like all television is sort of like that. There's no patting each other on the back when a good point's made. It's just anger and venom flowing over the airwaves. So Connecticut Citizens Action Group was founded, and what were the original? Now it sounds like you've gone to covering a lot of different areas, but what were the original items that Nader and Toby Moffett looked to affect?
It was before my time, so if I'm not 100% correct, please bear with me.
History tends to fade, but go ahead.
But there were a number of public information and right-to-know issues around the state government, and they published these huge directories on what was going on. There was work around trying to reform property taxes. There was work around the environment, were some of the big issues early on. So there were consumer, environment, and good government issues were probably the cornerstone of the organization early on, and it was more of a research and putting things out. Over time, we became more involved in organizing.
Okay.
And then around the time of Ronald Reagan and his ascension into power in Washington, we became more involved in politics in addition to more of the organizing. And some of our organizing was curtailed at that time because we had been one of the groups that, trained people through Vista and CETA in terms of how to become more effective participants in
volunteers in service to America. Yeah.
So you're more,
wow, you're better than I am.
So you're more than like
I hate acronyms.
Okay.
I hate acronyms. I try to say because a lot of times people will be watching and somebody will use an acronym, and I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of people probably watching that have no idea what that acronym actually stands for. Mm-hmm. So I try to expand it back out because you get a much better sense of what exactly it is than just hearing. VISTA's a very nice sounding acronym. Something's on the horizon. It makes sense as an acronym, but you still want to kind of know what. Because there could be some right wing group that uses the acronym VISTA, and V probably stands for venom. Or something like that.
So what was the issue concerning the property taxes back then?
Similar to what it is now.
Yeah.
The state has an over-reliance on property taxes. We have enough of we think, a resource base when it comes to monetary resources within the state of Connecticut that we should be able to figure out a fair, more sound tax structure that is less dependent upon the property tax and therefore freeing up towns and also allowing us to do a better job of financing, particularly education in the state.
I was thinking education because I remember Sheff versus O'Neill, the famous case where it was determined that, you tell me because you know better than I do.
It was more about the Hartford school districts, and it was saying that they were de facto segregated and that the state had a responsibility to help to desegregate the Hartford school system. And they've attempted to do a voluntary process of magnet schools throughout the Hartford region where a number are built in Hartford, a number are built in the suburbs and other things where you're providing people from both areas a more diverse educational opportunity. There's incremental steps all the time being made. I don't think any of us feel it's as much as should have been done in terms of educational opportunity for a lot of the younger folks in Hartford. There is another lawsuit that's being brought now, and I can't tell you what the acronym stands for, but I'll give you the background on what the lawsuit is.
Give me the acronym. I'm pretty good with those. I might be able to figure it out. I might be able to figure it out, too.
I think it's Connecticut Coalition for Education Justice, which is a number of people. I think that could be the name.
So it's not as cool as Vista by any means.
No, but it's pretty cool. It's got justice in it.
Okay. Well, anything with justice in it is a good thing.
And there is a lawsuit challenging how the state finances education. And it could be a big deal, and it could cost the state a lot of money. But at the same time, it could totally restructure how we finance education in a way that we think will both people who support the lawsuit, and we're not even signed on as on a brief or anything in support of it, so I can't say we, but people who support the lawsuit think that it could provide both greater educational opportunity but also really lessen the reliance on property tax, which will help so many people, particularly seniors or folks on fixed income or low income in terms of cars and the like municipalities. So
the shifting of taxes from local municipalities having to completely finance, well, not completely finance their own education, their own schools, because you have state funding that comes back down on an as-needed basis to some degree, and there's always that give and take, and people trying to well, we're not getting enough money, it's unfair. But I think Connecticut does a pretty fair job of sending money back in grants, educational grants. But if Connecticut had more involvement, and of course then it's a greater burden on the state level, if it drops local property taxes down equivalently I don't know how people could necessarily be against that.
Well, I mean, I think it depends what you replace it with in terms of a tax. And, you know, is it going to be a regressive sales tax, or would it be an across-the-board income tax hike, or would it be a more progressive income tax? So, I mean, what you replace it with would impact who would be upset.
Explain the notion of regressive sales tax and why it's called regressive, and then again, also progressive or regressive income tax. Explain what's actually meant by that.
So, progressive income tax, the idea is that people who make more money pay more money. And a regressive tax is where the burden of the tax is believed to fall more heavily on middle and low income folks. So there are ways that we try to make our sales tax less regressive, and we exempt things like food and a certain level of clothes that everybody needs. But at the end of the day, our low and moderate income folks in the state have a higher percentage of their budgets going towards taxes at the state and local level than wealthier folks.
Is that because everybody pretty much buys food in about the same amount?
Well, food is exempt from sales taxes. But it's because we have less money, and within there, you know, we say that through our rent, we pay for folks that pay rent, they pay for their landowners' property taxes as a percentage of their rent in figuring out these things. Connecticut Voices for Children do really great work in terms of analyzing how progressive, meaning how fair and just our tax structure is compared to what it could be. And one of the things when everybody talks about the tax burden at both the state and local level in Connecticut that they forget about is we have no county form of government here. And I grew up in New York State, which is right across the border. And a large number of services are provided across towns on a more regional basis through county government structure. And that is in most states throughout the country. It was fascinating as somebody who moved here from out of town to think that, you know, there is no county governance. At that time, we still had sheriffs were elected at the county level.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I guess a lot of states do have, above the local level, they've got county organizational government. And none of the counties in Connecticut have. There's no Fairfield County government level.
Well, I mean, we had one politician, that Bill Sherlock, who was a state representative, but I mean, he's running for something, but didn't he represent people from like New Canaan to Bethel to Danbury?
That's because he's running to be a state senator.
Oh, okay.
And likewise, state representatives, generally, their districts overlap more than one town.
Okay, so that's different than what you're talking about?
So in many places, the counties may be the vehicle to, they'll help to finance schools. They'll do entire health districts. They'll deal with the transportation planning, the waste removal and, you know, recycling for the region would happen through these county governments. Oftentimes we have a number of quasi-publics at the state level, and then towns can negotiate things like a cross-town sewer agreement but really when you look at the state politically, it's 169 individual towns, and you know, being involved politically, that was something that was drilled into me very early on. It's 169 unique municipalities.
In Fairfield County?
No, that's in the
Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
It's 9 different towns.
Wow.
Now, we do have the benefit in this area. They got the Housatonic Council, HVCEO, Housatonic Valley Council of Elected Officials for the Housatonic Valley region, and they deal with issues that are relative to the greater area. So that sounds like a step in that direction. At least it's not as formal as having a governmental body. Now, some people would say probably that in response to hearing the notion of a county-wide governing board or oversight committee, that's just one more layer of bureaucracy. Maybe it is. What does it do to benefit? What are the benefits of having those broader district-wide groups?
So I think your question there is a very valid question, and particularly in a state the size of Connecticut, both geography-wise and population-wise, whether or not we need a form of counter-governance. I'm not convinced we necessarily do. I brought it up that when people say the tax burden is so great on our local municipalities, the tax burden is so great at the state level, well, maybe we pay more taxes at the state level than they pay at another state, but we're not paying anything at the county level.
Okay.
So that's how I brought that up in the context. So I'm not arguing that we should have it.
Right.
Having said that, several years ago, and then politically it fell out of favor, there was a lot of talk about greater regionalism and greater planning. And there was everything from environment and transportation planning to waste management to as a means for desegregating some of the schools to all of the public health areas. These were all things that it made sense to get more cooperation between the different towns. Now we have these voluntary associations that you mentioned that may or may not have anything to do, don't necessarily have any enforcement mechanism behind them by law to force, Greenwich to work with a Stanford, for example, right? Or to have a Stratford work with a Bridgeport, or you've got a Bethel work with a Danbury across the board. We have the 169 individual towns, and these are my problems. Your problems are not necessarily my problems, and I think we should all be in this together.
It makes sense. And I'm drawing a blank, and you might know his name, but I've forgotten it. He was the first selectman of Fairfield. He, at the time, 4 years ago, had an exploratory campaign for governorship. We had him on as a potential candidate for governor. We had Rudy Marconi from Bridgefield on, who had an exploratory committee at the time to run for governor. Not Mayor Bill Finch from Bridgeport, but I'm trying to think. I can't think of his name, so excuse me on that.
I do remember, yeah.
You remember? Yeah.
I do remember, yeah.
But he talked about when we had that coastal storm, how Bridgeport and Fairfield, because some of Bridgeport's fire departments are very close to the Fairfield line. Some resources that Fairfield has are very close to the Bridgeport line. So they were able to get some cooperation between Bridgeport and Fairfield in terms of, you could call the Bridgeport Fire Department or they would respond in Fairfield where it made sense. And likewise, Fairfield with Westport next door on the other side. And when you had this disaster, when we had the storm and so much flooding, they found an opportunity to, as you're suggesting, to work together, not just say, well, you're a block away, we don't care about you. We're a block away from you, you don't care about us because we're a different town or city. But they actually work together in order to plan, not just for that particular disaster, but for future disasters. So we've had Tropical Storm Sandy since then, and they had something ready to put into place there so that the towns could actually cooperatively use their resources. And it worked to everybody's benefit. Because sometimes there's areas of Fairfield which are better served from a fire department that's in Bridgeport. So it made sense, and I think that's sort of what you're talking about, that mutual cooperation that extends over these 169 different entities, which call themselves either towns or cities.
Or there's other names that they use too. But yeah, I don't think Connecticut's ready to go back to county form of governance, although you'll always see counties on the maps, which is sort of crazy because that's about all that they serve for some statistical measurements and maybe public health districts or something. But I do think that there's something to be said about figuring out how to incentivize greater cooperation. And I think part of that is having the state assume a greater responsibility in terms of some of these areas and financing them. And I think the best way to do it is to make our tax structure more progressive. We don't ask the wealthiest amongst us to pay as much as New York or New Jersey do. And I think there's a strong argument to be made about how the quality of life here is pretty darn good compared to most places, and that if we want to continue that, we've got to make sure that we all are able to have the types of opportunities that people have had, and that we have a transportation infrastructure, that it doesn't take 2.5 hours to get from Hartford to Danbury, and so I mean there's investments we need to make collectively, and I think the state is the proper place to do that.
So who would be someone that you could help, the Connecticut Citizen Action Group? Like if I had a particular issue I needed help with, would I contact the Connecticut Citizen Action Group to help me if I had a problem with healthcare? I mean, are you an advocate for people who need help or underrepresented?
Yeah, I mean, I think folks who have healthcare needs or whatever, we try to work with them to advocate for themselves, right? We think that the people who need the types of changes are the most effective folks in it. So whether it's working with a group of people on a strategy, whether it's advocating at the legislature, probably about a decade ago, we were instrumental on healthcare in creating the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, which at that time was the ombudsperson, and Kevin Lembo was the second person who filled that role, played it perfectly, shifted the name to Healthcare Advocate. We played a big role at pushing for the Consumer Council in what used to be known as Department of Public Utility Control. Now
Public Utility Commission.
Right, and now it's the, I don't even know what it is, but it's PURA is the name of it. It operates under the new Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
They're problematic.
But the Consumer Counsel's Office has been a real key ally at saving all of us thousands of dollars on our utility bills and protecting some of the worst behaviors. So, I mean, we work with people to try to figure out how to make structural change.
Okay.
Our capacity isn't what it once was in terms of working with individuals through everything, but we and our allies have built a type of infrastructure, I think, that can be pretty helpful for folks.
Interesting. So now you said you're working with energy. Those are some of the issues that you're working with now.
So on that, there have been any number of fights. About a decade ago, the state deregulated its energy market, which we opposed, and in terms of that going forward, and were able to block it one year when it was particularly a bad policy. They were forcing Northeast Utilities to sell off all their generating facilities, and then they were going to be the supplier, and generators we were going to bid from competitive generators.
Yeah, you've got the two parts of your energy bill. You've got the supplier part and the delivery part, and so Connecticut Light and Power, and also the other electric company in Connecticut, Northeast Utilities, the other one in Connecticut.
Northeast Utilities, United Illuminated, both make up CLMP, so Connecticut Light and Power.
Okay. So they went to being they just handled the delivery system, the power lines, and all that part of it, but they don't actually supply much of the energy anymore. I mean, the Yankee nuclear facility, I guess that those nuclear facilities have a shelf life that's probably pretty coming down to the end of that.
Well, one has been shut down.
Yeah.
And but those were sold off to. They were sold once and they've been sold again. So I'm not sure the name of the company at this time that did it.
Sounds like the water systems in a lot of places have been sold multiple times.
So within this, we were able, that second year when it did pass, we were able to pass a number of consumer protections and environmental floors, and that's where we established the 20% renewable in 2020. Has to be Class 1 renewables, and just this last year we fought to keep incinerators from being included as part of that Class 1 renewable, and stopped, hopefully, maybe, we'll see, hydropower from Quebec being automatically classified as a Class 1 renewable, which means it's the cleanest of clean. And then there's a number of consumer issues we work on. So we work really closely with ARP, who's done some phenomenal work from a consumer end the last few years on energy. And then we work real closely with Environment Northeast, Clean Water Action, the Conservation of Elders, a bunch of other allies on the environmental side of the whole energy debate here in the state. And we sort of serve as a bridge between the two in terms of trying to figure out how do we push against these really powerful interests to have the smartest type of energy policy possible.
Okay. We're going to come back and do a second show. We're not quite finished yet with this half hour, but we're pretty close. We're going to come back, and I think we're probably going to talk on a more personal basis on what actually got you involved in this, what motivated you to get into doing what you do, and what stimulates you to be there fighting the good fight. But this has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, co-host Emilio Volpentesta, and Tom Swan from the Connecticut Citizen Action Group. And we'll be back.
So stick around.
Stick around. We're not quite done yet, but we're pretty close.
Thank you.
Hold on. There we go.